Curiosity, they say, is a powerful thing. But for Marissa, it was a force that led her down a path she never thought she'd take. She never imagined that one simple moment of questioning would change everything in her life. What started as harmless curiosity soon turned into a life-altering mistake, one that would haunt her forever. What was it that made her cheat? And why did she confess? Marissa had always considered herself a creature of habit. Her life with Marcus, though stable and comforting, had settled into a quiet routine. They had their moments, of course, the occasional dinner out, weekend getaways, small gestures of love. But as time passed, something shifted. The excitement that once sparkled between them seemed to fade. The passion that had once filled their home was now a distant memory, replaced by an overwhelming sense of predictability. It wasn't that Marcus had changed. He was still the same thoughtful, loving man she had fallen for. But somehow Marissa felt disconnected. She had never imagined this would happen to them. They had once been so in tune with each other, their laughter filling every room. But now, the silence was deafening. On one particularly quiet evening, Marissa found herself sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling absent-mindedly through her phone. The only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator, and even that seemed distant, almost like an afterthought. She wasn't really paying attention to the messages popping up on her screen, but one caught her eye. It was a picture. A simple one, nothing extravagant, just a snapshot of a man from her past. Jake. The name instantly tugged at her heart. They had been friends in college, and although they had lost touch over the years, the memories of their time together lingered. There had been no romance between them, just a deep connection, a friendship that had been genuine and full of life. The picture was taken at a cafe with Jake smiling, looking just as he did when they last saw each other. There was a comfort in seeing him again, even if it was just a photo. The curiosity hit her immediately. What had he been up to all these years? Was he the same person she remembered, or had life changed him? She hesitated for a moment, wondering if reaching out would be a mistake. But she couldn't resist. With a deep breath, she sent him a message, telling him how nice it was to see him again. It seemed harmless enough, a simple hello. But deep down, Marissa felt the stirrings of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Excitement. The reply came quicker than Marissa expected. It was brief but warm. Jake mentioned how nice it was to hear from her and asked what she had been up to. That small exchange felt like a spark, and for the first time in months, Marissa felt a little lighter. She smiled as she typed her response, sharing bits of her life, the mundane things, her job, the same old routines. But when Jake responded, his words carried something more. He asked her about the little things, the things that only someone who truly knew her would remember. The way she liked her coffee, the way she'd get excited over little things like new books or a rainy day. It was as if time hadn't passed at all. The old connection, the one that had once been so strong, was still there. They fell into an easy rhythm, exchanging stories and jokes like no time had passed. Marissa was surprised by how easily the conversation flowed. With Marcus, their talks had become predictable, centered around practicalities, work, bills, what needed to be done around the house. There was comfort in it, but there was little spontaneity. Here, with Jake, there was no need to think twice. It felt natural, like slipping into a pair of old, familiar shoes. As the days passed, the messages came more frequently. Each one felt like a little thread weaving them back together. They spoke about their memories, how they'd spent hours talking late into the night during college, the adventures they'd shared, the laughter that had echoed through their old dorm rooms. But as the conversations deepened, something shifted. Marissa felt a strange pull, a longing for something she hadn't realized was missing. The connection she had with Marcus, while comfortable, didn't stir her the way it used to. With Jake, it was different. There was a spark, a curiosity that was both exciting and dangerous. One evening, Jake suggested they meet up. He mentioned he was in town for work and thought it would be nice to catch up in person. Marissa's heart raced at the thought. She hadn't seen Jake in years, and the idea of reconnecting in person seemed innocent enough. But as the thought lingered in her mind, a knot formed in her stomach. Was this a good idea? Was it fair to Marcus? But the curiosity gnawed at her. She told herself it was just for old time's sake, nothing more, just two friends catching up. She quickly agreed, the excitement in her chest pushing aside the quiet voice of doubt. She didn't want to admit it, but a part of her was eager to see Jake again. The day of the meeting arrived, and Marissa couldn't shake the fluttering in her stomach. She spent far too much time standing in front of the mirror, unsure of what to wear, trying to get everything just right. She told herself it was just a casual meetup, but deep down she knew it wasn't just that. The anticipation built in her chest, and a part of her wondered if she was being foolish. When they met, Jake looked almost the same as she remembered. Taller, with a few more lines around his eyes, but that same warmth in his smile. There was an immediate ease between them, an unspoken familiarity that made everything else fade into the background. The cafe they chose was cozy, with soft lighting and the low hum of conversation around them. It felt comfortable, safe, as if they had done this 100 times before. They spent the first few minutes talking about small things, how life had changed, what they had been up to, the usual catch-up talk. But as the conversation flowed, it became more. There was something about the way Jake listened, the way he made her feel like she was the only person in the room. Marissa hadn't realized how much she missed that feeling. With Marcus, everything had become routine. She loved him, but somewhere along the way, their connection had become distant, and she had begun to feel like she was living beside him rather than with him. As they talked, the old chemistry between her and Jake resurfaced, stronger than ever. It wasn't romantic at first, but the bond they shared was undeniable. They laughed, joked, reminisced. The more they talked, the more Marissa felt herself opening up, sharing things she hadn't even realized she'd been holding back. And then the moment arrived, the one she would later wish she could take back. The conversation shifted to something more personal, and there was a brief, pregnant pause. Jake leaned in just slightly, his eyes searching hers. Without thinking, without truly understanding why, Marissa kissed him. It wasn't passionate, at least not at first. It was soft, tentative, but it sent a shiver down her spine. In that brief moment, the world seemed to fall away. There was no Marcus, no responsibility, no routine. There was just Jake and the overwhelming feeling of something familiar yet new. She pulled away quickly, her heart racing, her mind screamed at her. What had she just done? Jake looked at her with wide eyes, his breath quick. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Marissa felt the weight of her actions, the crushing guilt beginning to settle in her chest, but Jake didn't pull away. He didn't look at her with judgment. Instead, he seemed understanding. "I'm sorry," Marissa said, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean for that to happen." Jake smiled softly, his gaze softening. "It's okay," he said quietly. It's been a long time." But even as he said those words, Marissa felt something inside of her shift. The guilt was there, but so was something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was like a door had been opened and curiosity rushed in, bringing with it both excitement and dread. Marissa couldn't stop thinking about the kiss. Every moment, every glance, every word replayed in her mind. She felt guilty, confused, and more than anything, terrified. What had she done? The weight of the secret she was carrying pressed heavily on her chest, suffocating her. She had never intended for things to go this far. It was meant to be a harmless catch-up, a brief moment of nostalgia. But that kiss, it had changed everything. The next few days were a blur. She went through the motions with Marcus, but it felt like she was living in a fog. Every time he spoke, she felt like an outsider in her own life. He was kind, as always. He hadn't noticed the distance between them, or if he did, he didn't mention it. But Marissa could feel it. There was an ache in her heart that wouldn't go away. The connection with Jake had stirred something deep inside her, something she had buried for so long. She told herself she needed to stop. She needed to pull away from Jake, stop the texts, stop the meetings. But the pull was too strong. She found herself replying to his messages, eagerly awaiting each new word, each new connection. It was like a spark in the dark, something she hadn't realized she'd been longing for. She was craving attention, affection, validation, things she hadn't felt in a long time. And so the secret deepened. She met with Jake again and again until it wasn't just about friendship anymore. It was about something more, something dangerous. Each encounter pulled her deeper into a web she wasn't sure how to escape. She told herself it was just physical, that was all, but deep inside she knew it was more than that. There were feelings now, feelings she couldn't ignore. One evening, after another secret meeting with Jake, the guilt became unbearable. She could no longer look Marcus in the eye without feeling like a stranger in her own life. The lies, the sneaking around, the betrayal, it was all too much. She knew what she had to do. That night, as they sat at the dinner table, the quiet between her and Marcus was deafening. He looked up at her, his brow furrowed, his eyes searching hers. Something in his gaze told her he knew something was wrong, and she couldn't lie to him anymore. "I need to tell you something," Marissa's voice cracked as she spoke, the words barely making it past her lips. "I've been seeing someone else." Marcus's fork clattered against his plate, and he froze, staring at her with a look of disbelief. "What? What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low. The weight of the confession was like a stone in Marissa's stomach. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Marcus. It's not what you think. I kissed him. Jake, we've been talking and one thing led to another and I..." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she couldn't stop herself. The guilt was overwhelming and she needed him to know the truth, even if it shattered everything between them. Marcus's face turned pale as the words sank in. He didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. Marissa's heart broke as she saw the hurt in his eyes. She could see the pain, the confusion. He wasn't angry yet, just stunned, lost. "I didn't want to hurt you," Marissa whispered, her voice trembling. "But I did, didn't I?" Marcus stood up slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He walked toward the window, his back to her. Marissa felt the distance between them grow, the space between them widening with every second. She had crossed a line she couldn't undo, and she didn't know how to fix it. It's been weeks now since that night. The silence between Marissa and Marcus has become a strange companion, unspoken yet deafening. The days have been long, filled with difficult conversations, painful silences, and the slow process of rebuilding something that was almost lost. The truth had shattered their world, but Marissa could feel the tiny threads of hope starting to weave themselves back together, one moment at a time. Marcus hadn't left, though there were times when it seemed like he might. He hadn't screamed. he hadn't demanded answers. Instead, he had quietly listened to her confessions, his heartache written clearly across his face. He asked her one question that still echoed in her mind. Why? Why had she done it? Why had she let her curiosity lead her down a path that hurt both of them? Marissa didn't have a good answer. She could try to explain how she'd felt disconnected, how Jake had made her feel seen in ways she had forgotten. She could tell him how the excitement of their old friendship had reignited something deep within her, a longing she didn't even know was there. But none of that would take away the pain she had caused him. None of that would erase the look in his eyes when she confessed. She had spent so many nights lying awake, wrestling with her own guilt. The image of Marcus sitting in silence had haunted her, and with every passing day, the realization set in deeper. What she had done wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal. It wasn't just a kiss, it was the opening of a door to something that threatened to destroy everything they had worked so hard to build. But even in the midst of the pain, there was something Marissa had learned. She had learned how fragile trust really was. She had learned that relationships weren't just about love. They were about consistency, loyalty, and honesty. Curiosity, she realized, had led her to infidelity, but it was the deeper, more dangerous need for validation that had made her step over the line. She had looked for something outside her marriage because she felt empty inside. But in the process, she had broken the very thing that made her feel whole, her bond with Marcus. Now they were beginning the hard work of mending that bond. There were no promises that everything would return to normal. There were no guarantees that trust would be rebuilt overnight. But there was a quiet understanding between them that the road ahead would be a difficult one, filled with patience and forgiveness. They had both made mistakes, but Marissa was determined to learn from hers. As for Jake, he was no longer a part of her life. The connection she had felt was gone, the curiosity that had pulled her toward him fading as quickly as it had come. In the end, he had been nothing more than a distraction, a temporary escape from the emptiness she had felt. But that emptiness was something only she could fill. No one else could do that for her. Marissa's heart was heavy, but it was also lighter than it had been in a long time. She was facing the truth, facing the consequences of her actions, and trying to rebuild the most important relationship in her life. She didn't know what the future held for her and Marcus, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to try again. Curiosity had led her down a dark path, but it was through the darkness that she had found the strength to face the light. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't be painless, but Marissa knew now that the most important journey was the one of self-reflection, understanding, and forgiveness. Call to action. If this story resonated with you, remember, curiosity can lead us down paths we never expected. Choose carefully where you let it take you.